Thank you very much, Solomon. And I want to thank also Irina Bokova from UNESCO, Solomon Pasi from the Atlantic Club for inviting me to beautiful Sofia and to speak to you today. This is my third visit to Sofia, and what a better example of culture and heritage and historic buildings and tradition and history than this wonderful city. President Krasniewski strikes me as he's ready to run again. He's so eloquent and fit. And I do agree with Solomon that the world needs statesmen like him. Lakhdar Brahimi, my dear friend, he's been a special envoy to about 50 trouble spots around the world, and it's good to see him again. I want to just talk a little bit about more the national security side of this terrorism issue. I'm not an expert on diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, education, but I'm going to try to frame the arguments in the context of why this is important to all of us, this issue. It's important to Bulgaria, it's important to Latin America, to Africa, to Asia, to the European Union, to Eastern Europe, to America. Let me just focus first on the United States and Bulgaria. We've had a long history of partnership in security matters. Bulgaria has proven to be one of the United States' most outstanding NATO allies. President Obama himself has praised the government's commitment to fighting terrorism, supporting American efforts in Afghanistan, to rebuild the country, help its people have a brighter future. In fact, Solomon Pasi has to be credited with bringing Bulgaria into NATO, into the European Union. I'm so pleased that he's still a very active member of the foreign policy community. I had an honor and chance to meet him and his wife, Mrs. Pasi, who was also a minister here. And I'm delighted, again, to be with so many of you. So what we've seen in the last year has been the rising extremism that has caused, for instance, in my country, in the United States, the main issue in the presidential race is now national security, terrorism. It's supplanted the economy, which traditionally has been the main issue in any presidential race. But it's not just America. The violence has been raising its ugly head across the world, in the skies above the Sinai, on the streets of Paris, at an open-air market in Beirut, and finally in my country, at a facility for disabled people in San Bernardino, California. So the impacts of violent extremism are not confined to one part of the world. We've seen the deadly consequences of this extremism and radicalization in our own communities. The people that groups like ISIS are recruiting can come from any country. They can be male, they can be female, they can be any ethnicity, with or without religion. They're disaffected, they're angry, looking to hurt those that they see as different. They're looking to inspire others in our communities to commit horrible acts of violence. Extremism has sown tragedy in too many communities. Countering it is essential to the security of all countries and all communities. And no one can meet this challenge alone. And securing the future against terrorist threats means our governments, despite our differences, have to work together and break down the barriers of ignorance between our peoples. And yes, the key here is education. We have to tackle this challenge from every angle, disrupting plots, destroying safe havens, cutting terrorist funding, and deepening our focus on prevention and education. Yes, we have to defeat ISIS in the battlefield in the Middle East, but that is not going to be enough. We have to prevent it from radicalizing, recruiting, and inspiring others to violence in the first place. This means defeating their ideologies. Ideologies are not defeated with guns. They're defeated by better ideas, a more attractive and compelling vision of a future. Now, we recognize that our best partners in protecting vulnerable people from surrendering to violent extremist ideologies are the communities themselves, families, friends, neighbors, community, and religious leaders. This past year, we've seen horrific and tragic assaults on our shared heritage and values. Ancient treasures in Iraq and Syria have now become the casualties of continuing warfare and looting. And it's taken people like Irina Bukova and Solomon to deal with these issues effectively to try to keep these heritage sites open and accessible to all. No one group has done more to put our shared cultural heritage in the gun sights than ISIS, than Daesh, or ISIL, however you want to call it. They are not only beheading individuals, they are tearing at the fabric of whole civilizations. They have no respect for life. They have no respect for religion. They have no respect for culture, which for millions is actually the foundation of life and the shared bonds of our communities. Far from hiding their destruction of churches and mosques, they broadcast these with pride for all the world to see their acts of depravity and for all of us to be intimidated. That's why they do it. For the proud people of Iraq and Syria, the destruction of their heritage is a purposeful final insult, another example of ISIS's implacable evil. These acts of vandalism are a tragedy for all civilized people, and the civilized world must take a stand. These violent extremists are also targeting our youth, young people in our own local communities. They exploit social media. They use flashy graphics, images that could be taken from modern video games and tourist brochures. They prey like wolves on isolated and vulnerable individuals at the heart of our communities, radicalizing them with tales of false injustices and hollow promises. They make people turn away from their loved ones and fill their hearts with hate. Too often we turn a blind eye to the most vulnerable until tragedy strikes, but by then it's too late. So there are 3 steps, 3 things, 3 issues that I think governments can do to push back against this rising threat and protect our communities from radicalization and extremism. So what are these 3 things? First, closer cooperation among countries, among peoples. That has to happen. We need to work more closely between governments to understand the precise nature of threats and to better coordinate international responses. This means shared intelligence, more dialogue, putting aside our differences on trade, on commerce, on many other issues. We need to share more information about foreign terrorist fighters and those returning from conflict in places like Syria and Iraq. Those returning already radicalized can, like a virus, infect others in our communities, spreading their hatred and fear of others. Second, working with local communities. And what I think is most fitting here is that effective interventions often begin and grow within local communities. Government partnerships are critical, but the best solutions are bottom-up, not top-down. We need to work more closely with civil society, with local community groups, religious groups, human rights groups, to tap into the talents of communities which might otherwise be left on the sidelines. Empowering our local leaders is one of the best ways to stop extremism from flourishing. That includes especially women and girls, who are some of the most effective voices in countering this violent extremism. Who is better than a mother to spot unusual behavior in her child and intervene? We need to support projects to train women to recognize the signs of recruitment and radicalization in their families and communities, and to devise prevention strategies. I know that UNESCO's been doing fantastic work under Irina's leadership in education and women's empowerment, and we're very lucky to have her leading this effort. The role of police is also very important in our communities. Often they're held as examples of being outsiders to a community with a negative input, but we need to change that image. Police are important, and they're good people. They're part of our communities, our families. We need to help them build trust and strengthen cooperation between themselves and the communities vulnerable to radicalization. They face a daily challenge in protecting our society and the pressure to avoid making mistakes that will result in the loss of life, which is immense. We need to help them in our communities, and you know this has been a problem in my country. Many of our police need to reflect more of their communities. There has to be more diversity in their makeup. There has to be more community policing, so we have not been perfect here. Third point, greater opportunities. We need to create opportunities for our marginalized populations. If, from an early age, young people can picture a promising future for themselves and see a path to reaching that future, they're going to be less likely to turn to violence and extremism. We need to increase access to education and offer training, leadership skills, and mentorships. Perhaps the United States, working with many here in Bulgaria, can increase our efforts to bring English to many communities, to bring the French bringing their own languages, the Germans, the diversity of our cultures. We need to make a real impact in the lives of these people. We need to give young people hope and a brighter future to aim for. What violent extremists are trying to do is destroy the physical culture in the Middle East and also the core values we share and enjoy at home. Through twisted versions of education and evil propaganda campaigns, it is trying to sow divisions among our different communities and faiths, creating separation where none should exist. Extremists want to rob future generations of any connection to this past. We can see this with the sheer cultural barbarism of looting a museum, smashing thousands of years of culture to dust. We can see it when they try to radicalize our youth with a profoundly evil and medieval ideology and worldview. That is the future they're trying to create. That is what is at stake. And if you leave it unstopped, if you don't stand up, we're all complicit in the crimes that happen. So, in conclusion, one, our heritage and our values, everybody here in this room, are the same. They're under threat at the moment, and the world needs to act now as one, not as several, not petty rivalries, but as one. There are short-term actions that will hurt the physical presence of ISIS in the Middle East, but we also have to look at the long-term solutions that will stop the rot in our communities before it sets in. Education, cultural awareness are key to success. Extremists exploit fear that is a result of ignorance. Reducing ignorance helps to remove fear and in turn removes the power of hate that extremists need and exploit. So I'd like to conclude my remarks by commending the remarkable work done by Irina Bokova at UNESCO on this issue. Remarkable work, worldwide. You have a gem in this woman. Under this leadership, UNESCO is at the forefront of the fight against terrorism, cultural cleansing, and terror financing. This would have been unimaginable 10 years ago. She has totally reshaped and reformed the institution. And you know she's done that without the help of the United States. For some reason, our politics are such that we couldn't do what we should have. But the fact that the White House and the State Department are pushing hard to restart U.S. financing of UNESCO after it was stopped for many years clearly shows how respected she is in Washington, D.C. by the current administration. And we need more leaders like Solomon, like the president up here, like Irina, to ensure that we're on the right track to overcome extremism. And by the way, since the president said something that I want to repeat too, I'm out of government. I'm a private citizen now, so I can do and say whatever I want. And I want to just say to you, I was ambassador to the UN. I was a congressman. I was Secretary of Energy. I also ran for president, but you all forgot about that. I didn't do well. I was running against Obama and Clinton in the Democratic primaries. I used to be fourth in all the early primaries. You probably saw the Republican debate last night. 18 candidates. You know, there were only 8 of us. I used to be fourth, but it was not my year. But I ended up endorsing President Obama, and I watch politics. I do commentary, and I'm still involved. But I care deeply about the United Nations. My best job I ever had was at the UN, which, by the way, I noticed that the President and Solomon and Irina were talking. There are 196 countries that signed the climate change agreement. So I think it's 196, maybe 93, 92, depending on the latest statistics. And I believe that the time has come at the United Nations, since we talk about all the people that are suffering or disaffected, number one, that there has to be the first Secretary General that is a woman. That is a woman. Number two, Eastern Europe has not had a Secretary General. And you know, it rotates by region. There's nothing in law that says it has to be a Latin American or it has to be well, it can never be an American, we know that. But there's a European, Asian, Ban Ki-moon is from South Korea now. But there's never been an Eastern European. And I believe that needs to happen. And then you have to look at the record. She's had 10 years at UNESCO and done a remarkable job. And she, I believe, is going to be a candidate because a lot of countries want her to be a candidate. I don't speak for the United States. I want to state that clearly. But I do have a knowledge of the respect that she has in America. So since the president did it, and he's a former president, I tried to be a president, but I didn't make it. I want to say, too, that I think the time has come for a woman, for a leader with experience that has had UN support, UN contributions, somebody from Eastern Europe, from Bulgaria, somebody that has the support of so many cultural and educational institutions. And so I joined the chorus of those supporting Irina to be Secretary General. I hope when she comes back next year to address this same conference, she comes as Secretary General of the UN, and I hope that that happens. Thank you very much.